Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Home Brewer's Alley. I'm Todd Patton. I'll be your host for today. Jason's at a home brew club event, and so he will not be joining us for this particular brew session. But today we're going to be brewing an IPA from extract. Yesterday we talked about the ingredients and the equipment that you might need, and today we'll go through the step-by-step process on how to brew this IPA. We're all set up and ready to go. The one thing I did want to mention though is that just remember that when you're brewing, you're dealing with hot liquids, boiling water, propane in some cases if you're not doing it on your stove. So just make sure that you're being responsible, you're following all the manufacturer's instructions, and then also drink responsibly since you are making an alcoholic beverage. All right, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add the water. I actually use bottled spring water. Usually buy it in the gallon jugs like this, just because the water that I have here at my house tends to have a lot of calcium in it, and so I want the best water I can use so that I can get the best brew. Now we're doing a 5-gallon batch, so I bought 6 gallons of water. You always want to have a little bit of extra because you're going to lose some of it during the boil off process. So now I'm going to add the water to the pot, and we're going to have to bring this up to 150 degrees to steep our grains. There's a little bit of debate on the best way to steep, but a good rule of thumb for your temperature is 150 degrees, because if you go above 170 degrees, you start extracting too much of the tannins out of your grains, which isn't the best flavor for a beer. Also, the amount of water that you use for steeping your grains, it can vary. I've done it with all 5 gallons, and my beer turned out fine. Some people use half that amount and then add the water after they've done the steeping. For this particular batch, I'm going to try something different today. I'm going to start off with 3 gallons of water to steep the grains, and then once I've finished steeping the grains, I'll add the additional 2 gallons, 2.5 gallons. So that's about it. I'm going to add the water now, and then we'll get the fire going and start pumping the water up to 150 degrees. Once it's up to 150, I'm going to turn the fire off and add the grains and just let it steep in there for about 30 minutes, and then we'll start the next part of the process. One thing I also wanted to mention, before you add your water to your pot, just make sure your pot's been cleaned out and it's free of any dust and debris, because you don't want that floating around in your beer. You don't have to necessarily sterilize this because you are going to be boiling water in here and boiling your wort for about an hour or more. So it's going to kill off probably any bugs that might be floating around. But just make sure there's no bits of stuff in there. Okay? Just want to show you here how the setup is with the propane burner and the pot on the burner, how I have that set up. Again, as I mentioned before, you can set this up on your stove if you have a smaller pot. But for these larger size pots, it's better if you use a propane burner to support the weight of all the water in the wort. And as you can see, temperature's starting to come up here, but we will double check that with the handheld thermometer that I showed you yesterday. Okay, so our temperature I think is up to about 150 degrees, maybe just a little bit higher, which is okay. I'm going to go ahead and double check it with our meat thermometer just to be sure. And so with doing that, I'm just putting it down in the water here. And let's see, we are at about 150 to 153 degrees. So that's about where we want to be. So with that, I'm going to cut the heat. As you can see here, the grains are steeping and already the color is starting to bleed into the water, and that's just a few minutes into the process. So the hot water is already extracting a lot of the sugars and malts and whatnot that we need from the grains. Okay, so it's been 30 minutes since we've added the grains. They've been steeping in that hot water. So now we're going to sparge the grains. I got this nifty little colander that Jason gave me. That sits right on top of the pot like that. And I'm setting the bag of grains in here because we're still going to extract a little bit more of the grains by sparging. So I'm getting some of the liquid out here. I don't know if you can see the color, but how it's changed since we've had the grain steeping in there. just going to take some of this liquid out. Should be enough to get us started. And I'm just pouring this over the bag. Kind of filter some more of that down through there. Now some people squeeze the bag. I don't think that's really necessary, because if you do too much squeezing and pressure, you're going to extract tannins out again, which is something that we don't want out of the grains, because they have an astringent flavor, and you don't want that dry, mouthy feel. You don't want those types of bitters from the grains, because we're going to get our bitters from the hops. Just extract all the rest of the sugars and malt that we can get out of those grains. And just going to kind of press it down a little bit so I can get as much of the fluid out without squeezing the grains too much. Again, you know, people do this different ways. This is just a way that I found works for me. But you may find different methods in which to sparge your grains. And I think in some cases people don't even sparge, but I like to get out as much as I can from my grains. So now that the grains have been sparged, I'm going to go ahead and kick the heat back on. I'm going to get the heat coming back up. I'm also going to add another 2 gallons, actually probably about 2 1/4 gallons of water to give me a little bit of extra for what's going to evaporate during the boiling process. And then once the temperature comes up to about, I don't know, probably around 170, 180 degrees, I'm going to be adding the bags of malt, and that will be the next part of this episode. But we have 7 pounds of the dry malt extract. This is dry light that we're using. There's different types of malt depending on the type of beer you're making. There's extra light, there's dark, so on and so forth. And there's also liquid malts that looks like kind of like syrup, but I find that this is easier to use.